Hi, we're the Rices. We've been married for 12 years. We have 6 kids from the ages of 9 to 0, and we're full of passion to raise a household that serves and honors the Lord. And we want to encourage others to do the same.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Raising Rices podcast. Today we have kind of an interesting conversation to be had.
Yeah, as are many of our conversations. And as you know, these conversations all just flow right out of what we're talking about, what we're thinking about, and just conversations that we want to hopefully inspire you guys, help you to think biblically about the world we live in and how we're making decisions.
Yeah, and this might not come as any surprise to you if you've been following along with any influencers or media outlets.
Oh, yeah.
You might have heard of this term, the blackout.
Yeah, this idea that something bad is coming. We all experienced COVID. We all experienced 2020, lockdowns, rioting, all those things. And the question that I think has been on a lot of people's mind since then is what's coming next? Maybe it's disease X. Maybe it is the power grid's going to go down. You've heard different people, Christian, non-Christian, conservative or not, doesn't matter. People are talking about these things. And so I think it's good to be having a biblical mindset around how do we live in this world we live in.
Yeah, and along with the biblical mindset, it's super important to have these conversations with your spouse, with your family, with your kids. I was just sitting at the table, I don't even know, it was a few weeks ago, and we were introducing our kids to our fire escape plan for our new house.
Yeah, probably much later than we should have, but it was something that was just on our mind, and we're like, all right, we gotta, get some plans together. We had plans before, and we need to just be thinking about that.
Yeah, and so I think that is an example of something that you can approach this blackout X. What is it called?
Disease
X. I don't even know.
Who knows?
I think that's the point, is that you don't know.
Right.
And sometimes the fear of the unknown does create some anxiety, but our conviction is that there is only one thing to fear.
Yeah. In all of life, on all of life and death.
Yeah.
There's only one thing to fear, right? And that is the Lord. There's no there's nothing else that we should fear. And we need to know that is the center of where our thought should be focused, and that the fear of the Lord should direct the rest of our thoughts.
Yes.
We shouldn't let those thoughts of anxiety or what if or the fear-mongering of the media or anything else determine or persuade our thinking.
And equally, Darren and I have been talking about, there tends to be two sides of the road, I should say, that kind of propel us back towards the middle, back towards where we want to be aligned with a biblical worldview, with fearing the Lord only. And those kind of two in the Christian world, in the Christian circle, is the prosperity mindset and the poverty mindset.
Right.
The prosperity meaning, if I do good, if I have enough faith, if I pray, if I X, Y, and Z, give my money here, whatever, then I will get. Right? Like a if then type of thing.
Right.
And then the poverty being like, well, I'm just going to give everything away, which is both of them probably at its core, you could find biblical precedent for both.
Right.
However, we think as you are walking in both of those being faithful and committed and trusting on the prosperity side. And then on the poverty side, generosity, thinking of others, being concerned about your neighbors. But somehow we believe that the Lord actually has made the middle ground.
Right. I mean, the fact that both are true in Scripture, right? So if you read about Jesus, he says, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And you read in Acts, like the believers shared everything with each other and had everything in common. And they gave to the widows and orphans and cared for them and cared for the fellow believers, right? So those things are true. But what is also true is Proverbs, where over and over again, you see the blessing on the righteous man and the eventual curse on the wicked. And there is good that comes through living according to the law of the Lord, that you can't deny that when you live with integrity and you act righteously and you do business well and you don't go into debt and you act in generosity, that there is blessing that comes from the Lord with that. And so those two things, it's one of those things where it seems like maybe it's contradictory, or is it an Old Testament, New Testament thing? But we know that God does not change, and that there is a togetherness, that those things work in together. Now, that never means that you should give in order to get.
Right.
Or that you should think, wow, I'm going to be generous because the Lord is going to return it tenfold. But out of love for mankind, and out of love especially for your brothers and sisters in Christ, you should be generous. And the Lord will be faithful to take care of you, to provide for your needs. But we're also called to be wise, right? We talk so much about Proverbs 31 today, when Christians and other people alike want to make women these independent entrepreneurs. And we've talked about it before when we were talking about biblical womanhood, but there is this essence, this element of wisdom in what you buy and what you sell and how you do business that is expounded on both for men and women throughout the Proverbs. And so we're not to just, I guess I'm trying to say, we're not to just foolishly give everything away with no regard for our own family and our own community.
Yeah, it's this really delicate balance. And when you brought up that the world is trying to almost separate or individualize out family members in general, but specifically talking about wives and husbands, when we're saying, well, this wife is going to go over here and do this thing over here, while this husband does this thing over here, I think we're missing the key element of the team. Right. And I think that as we're going to kind of dive in and talk today, that team spirit, that togetherness, that's the caring for one another in your family, the caring for one another in your biblical community, and the caring for one another in the community at large, is where we find the need for preparedness. Because it is out of that heart of thinking of others that we do think in a future perspective, always fearing the Lord first, but preparing for the what ifs.
Right. And Proverbs talks about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, right? And wisdom. And so I don't think there's any precedence in the Bible for us to be living our life with our head in the sand, but that we are to act wisely and shrewdly. But as James also says, we're not to project forward and put our whole hope or trust in our preparation.
Right.
And so that's why we say, like, we have to only fear the Lord. And so, and you talked about kind of two ways, being prosperity and poverty, but it also had me thinking about, like, a lot politically in Christian circles, you hear people say, like,
all the P's.
Yeah. You hear people say, like, well, I'm not, liberal or conservative. I'm going to be on the kind of this third way. and, maybe been coined like third wayism. And I think that what we're not saying is that there should be a passive middle ground, but that we should take action and we should live wisely, but we should be third wayism in the sense that our hope is not in socialism, and our hope is not in conservative men that come to power and fix all the wrongs in the world, right? In the same way that when we're talking about preparedness, we're not going to bury our head in the sand, but we're not going to put our hope in being prepared. Our hope is in the Lord.
Yeah, just to be abundantly clear, we're not talking about prosperity gospel, and we're not talking about poverty gospel, because there is only one true gospel.
Right.
And that is through the Lord Jesus Christ.
But you're talking about just these mindsets.
Right. Yeah. But just for clarity, because you might have heard prosperity gospel, poverty gospel before. Right. But what we want to jump into today, now that we've kind of laid a little bit of groundwork, right, is that when we think about these things, these potential blackouts, the grid goes off and you just don't have any electricity, for days, weeks, months, who knows, right?
Well, and which winter was it? It was not very long ago that Texas had that huge blackout.
Yeah.
And due to all the ice storms and everything, and it wasn't that long, but it was abnormally cold for them, plus blackout. Mm-hmm. And people froze to death in their homes.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't get out and they had no heat or they had no food. And it was really devastating, even just a short amount of time in a localized region.
Yeah. And so to think about something globally, to think about something where the internet is not working and you can't get a hold of money or get gas, or, there's a lot of different thoughts. Scenarios. That's a good word. Scenarios about what is out there and what could happen. So nothing that we are going to talk about today is geared to any one specific event, but just having a mindset of being ready for a way to care for your family and to care for your neighbors. And the way we want to talk about this today is kind of a two-parter. Not parter in the episode, but right. Two mindsets, one of lifestyle and one of emergency.
Right. And I think that's where, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, you just rattled off a bunch of things that sound tremendously overwhelming. How could you possibly prepare for any of that? I think that is where you're not going to prepare for an endless list of possibilities overnight, and you're not going to prepare for it in the next 3 years. But I think what our encouragement is, or the way we've been thinking about this, and hint, hint, we've been thinking about this for years.
Yeah.
Is that lifestyle component that you're kind of talking about. So let's frame that up for a minute, and let's say, here's the idea, being that your preparedness comes out of and is a natural just expression of the way you live your life every day.
I know, it reminds me of this story. We don't go out to dinner very often because as a family of 8, that's kind of expensive. But when we do, I cannot even tell you how many beautiful compliments we have gotten from people eating in the restaurant, or a waiter or a waitress. Just, hey, wow, these kids are really behaved. Or this, you guys have done such a good job, all the things. But every time Darren and I leave the restaurant and we think, well, it's only because that's the expectation that we have at home.
Right. If you are just talk about, and you're hoping to just miraculously enact emergency plan when you show up at the restaurant with your family and your kids have never sat down to dinner before as a family and waited for food and ate food politely and then finished and waited for everybody to be done before they start running around, then you're completely unprepared,
Yeah.
right? But if it is your lifestyle that you just live that way, that's just the way you kind of do life every day, then all of a sudden you look like this prepper when you go out to eat.
So just thinking about it that way, is this your lifestyle? And then when an emergency hits, it's just an opportunity to practice some of the values, the character qualities, the things that you've put into place?
Right.
Or is it, oh no, we don't have anything in our back pocket. We're not ready for this, you know? So we want to just talk about a few lifestyle habits or character qualities, because, we like to talk about convictions, character qualities, and challenges.
Right.
So we talked about our conviction, about being ready, and about being prepared, but not living in fear. And so here's kind of like a list, not all encompassing, of course.
Yeah.
But a list of some things to kind of get in your mind, habits to learn, things that you can be mindful of to be prepared for any kind of disastrous thing.
Right. And just the things that are on the top of our conversation list right now. Really.
Right. And I think the biggest one that you've probably heard us talk about a million times, which is fitting because this is a podcast about raising households that serve the Lord, is the importance of Bible time.
Yeah.
Family Bible time, establishing your biblical worldview, because this is going to combat fear like nobody's business.
Yeah, and establishing a habit of devotional time together.
Yeah.
Establishing a habit of teaching your kids the word. Like we were just talking about like some crazy scenario where all of a sudden what seems like, oh, I go to church in my town is, well, I can't possibly walk there.
Right.
And so then you're trying to figure out like, well, how are you going to meet with believers? And what's your stopgap in the interim? Like maybe you get together with some neighbors or something eventually, but what's your immediate discipleship for your kids? Like, are you relying on a video every day?
Because if there's no internet.
Because if the internet's gone, then you need to be equipped to teach the Bible to your kids.
Right. And that equipping comes with practice.
Right.
In the family Bible time. Some a little bit more practicalness with that is that there is some amazing resources out there when it comes to the Bible. Like Darren mentioned, you can listen to sermons on audio now. You can pull up, amazing expositional pastors on YouTube. You can have your Bible on your phone, right?
Yeah.
Blue Letter Bible is a great resource. But what happens when these resources, which are phenomenal, are not available?
Yeah. And so then you still, like all of a sudden, instead of being able to look up that Hebrew word or look up that context or whatever it is, you are reliant on a print version. And do you have a print version of the Bible? Do you have a print version of the Bible that's in the translation you usually read?
Right.
Do you have a print version of a commentary or a Bible backgrounds or Bible languages or a Strong's Concordance?
And you don't have to have all of these things.
They're just ideas. They're the things that pop into my head that when we are practicing, studying scripture, we use internet resources for sure.
For sure. I mean, you're probably listening to it right now
on an
or
internet
watching
resource,
it on our YouTube, and this is an internet resource.
Yeah, but are you familiar with, or do you have, or do you know somebody who lives close that has kind of those more tangible analog versions of the most important thing, which is what is the knowledge needed for life and salvation, right? That's found in the scripture. Reminds me, not to get too off on a tangent, but that movie, The Book of Eli.
Oh yeah, I never watched it. It looked too scary.
Oh, it's super like post-apocalyptic, but the most valuable thing that they were all looking for was a copy of the Holy Scriptures. And not that we're looking at post-nuclear, war zone, but that is something that's very important. And like you were saying, the practice of sitting down and reading the Bible together, super key. Live it as a lifestyle. And then when it's an emergency and you have to enact it, you're ready.
Right. The next really important lifestyle, and I think before I tell you this, I love that you brought up the Bible, because we could tell you all of the food, water, shelter, heat, all those things, which we are going to talk about, the practicalness of it.
Yeah.
But does it matter in comparison to salvation?
Right. No.
Right? So anyways, this next part.
But does that mean you shouldn't be foresightful in providing
No.
for your family in the rest of the areas? No.
Right. Oh, this is good. It's all encompassing in that regard.
Yes.
But the next really important character quality that has to be developed in the lifestyle section, because it will be imperative during an emergency, is building your community.
Mm-hmm.
This is both your community, biblical community, but like Darren just mentioned, we drive about 20 minutes to church. We live out a ways, and that's not horrible. Get in your car Sunday morning, 20 minutes, not bad.
But you jump on the highway for most of it, and next thing you know, it's like 14 miles.
Yeah, that's not going to be accessible if you don't have cars, electricity, etc., right? And so community, your biblical community, who lives around you, who is accessible, who do you need to be thinking of in an emergency to check on, who can you ride your bike?
Yeah, we were even talking about that the other day. Like, which members of your church are you connected with that live like within walking distance of your house?
Yeah.
Because, all of a sudden that becomes a factor. Who is in your community, and who should you be thinking of, to gather with and to encourage and to see what they need. All of those things start to play into factor really quickly, or they could potentially.
And the biblical community, like we just mentioned, so important, but also don't disregard or forget about your immediate community, like literally the neighbors you're touching fences with, right? Like these people, we should, regardless of an emergency or not, be investing in and developing relationships with.
Right.
But in the case of an emergency, they are going to be your best resource and ally for many reasons, right?
Yeah, and you're going to be able to resource them, hopefully, both with what you have to offer.
Right.
And with, like you mentioned before, the most important thing in an emergency, which is hope.
Yeah.
And what is the hope that we have, right? It is in the salvation that comes through Jesus Christ.
Right.
And so we can't ignore that, like, awkward opportunity.
Yeah. So good. Okay. So we talked about the Bible and we talked about community.
Yeah. Now, the rest gets a little more practical. And I don't know if we should address them kind of one at a time, or we should several of them go together. And that's like the gardening, the storing food.
Okay. I'm going to stop you.
Okay.
There's some things that can, if we gave you a list, it could feel overwhelming. Especially if this is not the lifestyle that you're already doing. Right. And like, so say gardening. Here, okay, we used to live in this city and had maybe like 4 garden boxes.
Yeah, not very much.
And it was challenging because it was the beginning of our gardening season as far as learning, starting seeds in our homeschool room,
Yeah.
And now we have 30 plus garden boxes and a greenhouse. So I say this to say, when we say gardening as a lifestyle choice, just to be aware of how to do it, know how to garden, that is very helpful when it comes to not only living right now and in the present, feeding your family, using the gift that God gave of growing. I think you can see throughout scripture how relevant it is for all generations.
Yeah.
And what a biblical precedent to teach your kids certain different lessons.
Sowing and reaping and hard work produces fruit.
So good.
Yeah.
But also, just know that there is a learning curve that comes with gardening. Your zone, disease, soil. And so we're not here to give you a gardening 101, right? But what your other option is, if you don't have the ability to garden or the space to garden, and you're choosing to do just using the resources that you have, there are things out there, tall towers you can grow things on. You can just decide to grow what your family eats. Like, I was just thinking, remember they had those like topsy-turvy strawberry things?
Oh, right.
You know, like maybe you live in an apartment and you can just have 2 of them hanging off your apartment. That's awesome.
Right.
You know, it's a skill that you're developing, is what I'm trying to say. You don't have to go and grow all of your food for the year. I mean, that's awesome. And
or
if
like,
you do, please message me, because I need to ask you questions.
Yeah, some microgreens, some fruit, some herbs. All those things are, because so the other thing is, I think too, we think, okay, if you're gonna garden, we must be talking about, like you're saying, growing enough food to last your whole family all year, and who can really do that, and how are you gonna store it? But in reality, it is, like you're saying, the community element. Maybe you develop a skill for growing herbs.
Right.
And you love that because it's fresh and it's delicious and it becomes part of your lifestyle.
And it's perennial.
Right. And then next thing you know, in a situation where all of a sudden you're pulling together with your community a little more, whether it's just our current economic downturn or it's some sort of disaster, you can trade. Right? Your herbs for some chicken, or your herbs for, a squash. And next thing you know, like, now you have squash and herbs, and you have a hearty meal, because you're part of the community that's contributing together.
I think you've probably heard this word self-sufficiency a lot, going around the internet, going around conversations. I just want to be self-sufficient.
It's such a huge box.
It's huge, and it's very talked about and very desired.
Yeah.
Like, they want to obtain this. But in reality, like, even back when people were more self-sufficient,
right?
Like pioneer days,
but they still like lived a certain distance away from a town for a reason.
Yeah.
And they still knew their neighbors for a reason. And somebody had a horse and somebody had an ox.
Right.
And they would trade off and plow somebody's field and ride somebody's horse to town. Like,
yeah.
Because it's community sufficiency.
It is. And that's the same with growing, right? Even when we moved here, our very sweet neighbor in the front gave us a bunch of tomato plants. I mean, like, we were growing our own. That was so kind of her, though, which it was just the outpouring of her generosity.
Right.
And so, we're specifically talking about gardening, but we're going to move into another element here of food storage.
Hello, we want to interrupt this podcast today to let you know that it is brought to you by Heritage Home Family Farm, a Christian family seeking to bring a legacy of flavors to your table. This family is passionate about building the family culture and making homemade with ease. They have a series of spices, loose leaf teas, and baking mixes available to make delicious, clean, and easy homemade food at your table and in your kitchen a possibility in today's busy world. Find out more at heritagehomefamilyfarm.com.
And if you are able to store some of that food, or we couldn't grow peaches this year.
Right.
We have baby trees. We planted our orchard, but we purchased, I don't remember, 50 pounds?
No, it was like 125 pounds.
I was way off on that one. I should remember. I canned them all.
Yeah, you did.
But let's say, you purchase those things and then you store them. You can them, you dehydrate them.
Right.
Maybe you have a freeze dryer, whatever whatever your skill set or learned desire skill set is,
right,
you're going to have those things as well to trade.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, and in that food storage category,
right,
we don't grow our own rice.
No.
Or our own, we don't mill and grow our own wheat or those type of things. But talking about a lifestyle, if you live a lifestyle and you develop a lifestyle that cooks from scratch and cooks from true, just dry goods,
mm-hmm.
then you and that's the regular part of your lifestyle.
Right.
Then you develop the capacity to have all of a sudden you don't need to buy the beans maybe in a 2-pound package. You can, buy the Costco like 20-pound package.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're a prepper and you didn't even know it. Like, you're prepared in the sense that you don't have to buy beans every week at the grocery store
Like maybe,
for your soup or your refried beans or your whatever. But now you buy beans once a quarter.
And that's important when you think about in an emergency setting, the grocery store only is going to have groceries for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, and if you're like, somebody, then maybe you have more beans than the grocery store has.
You might, if you're us.
And you're bagging them out and trading them with your neighbors for fresh tomatoes.
Right. So these are like food storage. And again, this isn't comprehensive. Like, we're not going to tell you how to do it. We'd love to. I mean, we are passionate about this. And it's actually just come out of a lifestyle choice because we have a large family. It's more economical
to buy in bulk.
And so it's just an outpouring of our lives.
And to cook from scratch.
Yes.
But, the the other side of that is that's highly advertised right now. If you are, I don't know, maybe it's only advertised to me, I don't know. But is this idea of like, well, I'm going to buy dedicated freeze-dried 3 months of meals for myself and then for every member of my family. Well, it makes more sense to us to do it practically out of our regular lifestyle because it's the food that you're used to cooking, you're used to eating it, and you rotate through it so it doesn't go bad.
Very important.
And then it also becomes like, it's not this massive thing like, oh, am I going to go out and spend $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 on 25 years worth of freeze-dried food for my family? Or am I just going to buy an extra bag of beans at the grocery store this week?
And if you can go out and buy those freeze-dried meals, I mean, that's awesome.
And we've considered it, especially related to meat.
Yeah. Because what I think it's important is when you are preparing long storage of food for either your lifestyle or for a disaster emergency, is that you need nutrient dense food. You need calorie filled food. Right? You got to fill those tummies. But then you also got to remember that there are minerals and vitamins and things in like fruits and vegetables and whatnot that you're not going to be getting necessarily.
Like, you might think, oh, I'm just going to eat rice and beans.
Which people do.
Which you can. But if you have the opportunity for a better diet,
right,
we know it's a good thing.
And it's interesting because when we're talking about this emergency scenario, like if you go online and just Google, like how much food do I need to prepare or how much, yada, 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 if this happens or if this happens. Several of the natural disasters or the, hypothetical emergencies that are going to be potentially coming our way are blackouts, right? Where you don't have any electricity and they don't specify how long that will be, right? They don't say it's going to be 3 days. They don't say it's 3 months. And so it's kind of like you're preparing for the unknown, trusting in God, not living in fear. But you also, could we all survive 3-day fast? Probably.
Right.
But 3 months, that's a different ball game.
Well, and it was not even that long ago. We were living in Oregon. We lived in our house still. And in a suburb of Oregon, during a snowstorm one winter, we had friends that were out of power for like 3 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Just in the middle of town.
Yeah.
And they borrowed a generator to run their freezers for a while because even though it was cold outside, those freezers don't stay frozen.
Yeah, I think I read that if you keep your freezer door closed, it will stay cold enough for food safety for 2 days.
That's not long.
No, and your refrigerator, if you keep that closed, it will keep your refrigerated things safe temperature for 4 hours.
So they're built not to hold the cold in as much as they are to just keep things cold.
Yeah.
And we were talking about here, well, maybe it's winter and you might be fine.
Just
throw
outside.
Your food in the snowbank, right? But if it's summer, you are out of your frozen food really quickly.
Yeah. Okay, along with all the food things, we think it's important for a lifestyle to know your local resources and to be purchasing from them, to be making a habit and a relationship with those people around you. We have some really good friends we've met here, have goat milk, like what a resource that is to not only support them right now and be able to enjoy this delicious goat milk, but when something happens, those are the people that are going to have more to offer you than the grocery store. As we've mentioned, the grocery store is going to run out. I mean, think back about COVID.
Right.
People were like limited in eggs and they had no more toilet paper, like it just goes fast because they're not set up. The grocery stores are not set up to provide for the rush of an emergency. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. When we live such a short cycle system where there's not a lot of stock on the shelves because it's always coming in every day and every day it goes out the door, that when one day goes by and nothing comes in, that's a massive hit on the stock on hand. And the other point, I think, along with electricity is that, we were talking about this, like, okay, well, how do you preserve like meat or fats or animal proteins?
Yeah.
You can can meat or you can freeze dry meat.
And we should say you can pressure can meat.
Right, pressure can meat. And, okay, hypothetically though, thinking of ideas, there are so many tangents today, but if you think to yourself, oh, I'm just going to have my meat in the freezer, and then if the power goes out and it's out for more than 2 days, then I'm going to Google how to pressure can my meat that's now thawing, then you're behind the ball because you don't have the internet.
Right.
Potentially. Right? So anyway, pressure canning meat but knowing how to do it properly and safely. Do you have a paper resource?
Right.
So that when the power does go out and you've got 40 chickens in your freezer, you can decide, guess what we're doing the next 3 days? We're pressure canning chicken.
And
so that it lasts.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other way that all of those things store is on the hoof. Right?
We're not.
If you have an actual pig in your backyard, it is not going to go bad.
You got to keep feeding it. But...
yeah, you have to feed it something, or if you know the actual goat farmer that has 70 goats and, 2/3 of them are a meat goat variety, you might have never eaten goat before, but you sure will when you decide you need to slaughter a goat and pressure can goat meat.
I love it.
I get so tangent.
You do, but you brought up a really, really good point that it's part of our lifestyle, and you can notice it behind us if you're watching the YouTube video. We are passionate about books. We think it is invaluable to have resources that are tangible, that cannot be destroyed by the internet or by electricity. Now, we have collected many over the years, and that just might not be financially savvy for, you. But you know what? You do have probably a printer. And you can go on to Pinterest or on your favorite blog and just print out a few things that you think might be helpful to you.
Right.
Here's an example that I don't own right now that I want to purchase is ideas about how to cook bread or a carb on the fire. I love to cook bread in our oven.
Electric
oven. So
we'll be going back to cooking Johnny cakes.
I do have that recipe. So, but that's just an example. So maybe you just, you can't go out and buy 20 books, which is fine. I mean, I shouldn't either, but sometimes I do. So maybe you go online and like I said, you just print a couple recipes, put it in a 3-ring binder, and that's for you. That's for just in case. And we're not living in fear, but sometimes doing steps like that gives you more peace because you know that you are doing the steps to prepare your family.
Right.
For the glory of God too, as we've talked about many times, to give out of the abundance that you have or to care for your neighbors, whether those are elderly around you or children. We prepare not just for our own family, but for those around us, because we're all made in the image of God.
What was that kind of? I felt like it was kind of a joke, but not really a joke. Like in 2020, I don't remember if somewhere was out of bread, and then everybody like starts buying the flour, and it was kind of a joke. Like, but does anybody know what to do with it? and I think that's what you're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
and maybe it's just part of your lifestyle. You bake bread over an open fire all the time, but resourcing your neighbor with it is the key.
Right. Another really important element that we feel for lifestyle that is going to play out so well in an emergency situation is having a wellness mindset. There will probably not be hospitals and doctors readily available. And so having the things on hand, like first aid, but also more than that, right? Like what kind of teas soothe the tummy when you have a tummy ache, or help you build your immune system up when there's a lot of sickness going around and you can't go into the store and get vitamins,
Right.
Maybe it is ideas about how to reduce a fever if your child has a fever and you can't go and get the things that you're used to getting.
Right. Yeah, all those kind of ideas, just being well-rounded, I guess, when the conventional becomes unavailable or overwhelmed.
Yeah. And this is just hypothetical that these things are going to happen, but having good wellness or ways to help support your family is a great lifestyle choice. Again, even if no emergency comes.
Right. Absolutely. Another thing we've talked about too is having like activities that you do that don't involve electricity. Like if you're kind of used to watching TV and playing video games and surfing the internet, and then all of a sudden there's no power.
Right.
Right. What kind of things do you have built in? And I think this comes in like both in reducing the anxiety and the fear, just like how much can you like prepare your kids by telling them like, hey, this is this situation, and how much can life just like kind of continue as normal because you're used to playing chess by candlelight on Friday nights anyway, so now it's not a big deal.
Yeah. And those, again, when we were talking about these lifestyle things, they're all good for you. You know what I mean? They're good.
Like, nobody's suffering because they're not playing video games.
Right. And then it's like that dinner example at the restaurant. It is good to have good table manners in your family in general when you're eating at home. And so then when you get to that restaurant, you get to shine in that moment because you've already developed the habits.
Right.
I had a basketball coach once tell me, you practice how you play and you play how you practice. So it's the daily comings and goings that are going to make the difference for you and your family if there is an emergency. Now, we're going to move into the emergency. And there's a few things that you have to kind of have different than your lifestyle choices prepared for an emergency.
We don't have to. We're just not completely against the practicality of the technology that fuels our everyday life.
Right.
Like you don't have to use an electronic source of water coming to your house, but it sure is nice.
Yes.
To have running water.
And so, so let's just jump in. Water. If you don't have electricity, if there's something wrong with your water, you're not getting it. Water is a necessity. So, we thankfully are on a well, but our well is operated off
by an electric pump, yeah.
So that's something we've been talking about personally. Okay, well, what do we need to do? But what we've already learned is that our neighbor has a hand pump.
Multiple of our neighbors.
Yeah, but we wouldn't know that unless we were in relationship with them.
Yeah, we were like in their yard, talking to them about our well, asking them about their well, and if they knew a guy to do and they're like, oh yeah, we have one, a hand pump. Let's see if it works, and sure enough,
cute.
Like 6 pumps later, the kids are pumping water by hand out of their well.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great resource, but you don't also want to have to count on that neighbor's well for that resource.
I have learned that you can, if electricity is going out, you can fill your tub, any of the tubs that you have in your house, as much as you can, because, you might need that to flush toilets. You might need that to wash things, dishes or whatever. You can boil it. So that is a resource that
It's probably the largest vessel you
Right.
have at your house that you can fill with water.
And, if, Lord willing, that emergency doesn't go very long, you just unplug it and it goes right back down, right? And so that is a tool that you can know and use when it comes to water, because water is really important. We talked already about food, having food storage, supporting those with food. So we're not going to belabor that anymore. But I think that an element of shelter, both in the safety and the protecting your shelter, might come into play depending on your location. For us, we do live out a little ways from the city, but what I was talking to Darren about was like, I want to have a readiness to house people if needed. Like if our brother and sister in Christ or even our neighbor came to us and like, can, something happen in my house? Can I come here? Yes. The answer is yes,
Right.
So just having that mindset, that hospitality, that caring for others. Also knowing though, in desperate times, those that do not have hope in the Lord, and sadly, I guess maybe even some that know the Lord but aren't living out that life, they can become desperate and try to think of themselves above your family and above those that you're caring for. And so you do need some sort of protective measure put in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impractical to think that we live in a world that won't become violent when it becomes desperate.
Yeah.
And of course, each of us have to weigh in our hearts against our conscience what that looks like and what that is and what our response potentially would be in those situations. But I think especially as a man, if you are not prepared to defend your family against evil, that you are passing or shirking your duty to care for them. So whatever that looks like in your situation, I think it's just worth thinking about, that if all of a sudden you're the only one that has your lights on, or you're the only one that has food, or you're the only one that has water, then what are you doing in those situations? And to think about it ahead so that in the moment you can be wise and you can pray and act in wisdom.
Yeah. And again, the goal is to provide for our community, but to provide in the way that's God glorifying and to set that example, hopefully, for the community at large. Another thing, I already joked that I use the electric oven for all these handmade things, but if the electricity goes out, what kind of cooking sources do you have? Do you have a propane barbecue? Do you know how to build a fire and cook over the fire? Do you have cast iron to put on that fire so that you can cook the food that you need to cook for your family? That would be definitely an emergency situation, but you have to know how to do it in your lifestyle before that emergency happens.
Yeah, so like in our, when we lived in town, that was just like having 3 or 4 of the like 5-gallon propane tanks on the side of the house and having a couple extra bags of briquettes in the garage and a little sack of firewood outside. And then throughout the summer, when that stuff's on sale, you would replenish it. And then in your lifestyle, you would just cook over the fire in the backyard part of the time because it was fun and it tastes delicious.
Another part would be light, right? Do you have candles? Do you have batteries? Do you have flashlights? Our kids and our family has gotten a habit of doing candles at dinner. So we have collected candles and we sell candles at our farm. And so we have those things on hand. We just replenish as we use. Maybe that's not the case for you.
Maybe you have a solar generator and rechargeable LED lights or something, but
way more fancy than us.
Yeah, way more fancy.
And we applaud you.
But maybe you live somewhere where the sun shines all the time too. Yeah. Like if you don't and you think, oh, my solar generator, well, it could be winter and raining and cloudy and that might not get you a lot of light.
Right. We did talk about wellness as a lifestyle, which is really important, but it is also important for emergencies to have some sort of medication or first aid available. If you're probably way better at talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's tough. One thing that has been on my mind a little bit is there's some good resources out there I think are good. I haven't, dove into them quite yet, where they'll prescribe you like a full set of antibiotics ahead.
Oh, wow.
And you can order them and have them on hand. I think that's the big missing link, but other than that, basic first aid things, and like you said, basic medications. Like, I don't know, the biggest one that comes to my mind are like Benadryl and aspirin, because you can treat, at least preliminary treatment, better than nothing. You can treat heart attack, stroke, and allergic reaction with just like a Walmart thing of aspirin and Benadryl.
Yeah.
I mean, it's better than nothing, but if you have it, then you won't regret not having it.
Right. Things like simple colds and stuff like that we already talked about in the wellness. You would already have those things on hand. That's the things that you would be using. But I think Darren and this emergency is talking about emergency cases.
Right, like bad sickness, or you got into a bee's nest, or you whatever, but accessing a hospital is impractical. Well, you're going to want some basic anti-inflammatory and antihistamine, or you're having chest pain because all of a sudden you're working harder than you were before, and you need to take a daily blood thinner to keep blood circulating to your heart, because there's no room for them to get you into the hospital to fix it right now. So people did for centuries.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reality is, if something bad happens for long enough, the lifespan of people will start to drop again. But if you have a few things, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, so it's good. And again, we're not doomsday people, but these are just great to have on hand.
Yeah.
Especially when you're being hospitable and something happens and you want to have the resources to support the people that come to your house, but you then also have it for emergencies, which is really good. When I was doing a little bit of reading, okay, so Darren and I just drove back from a family vacation today. We were in the car for like 8 hours and we talked all about this. And so then I get on, Google. I'm like, okay, what are the things you need for like, disaster? World War III kept coming up. I'm like, oh my word.
Great, yeah. But did you hear even like disaster / chaos? April 8th is like some eclipse goes through the United States, through Oklahoma somewhere.
Oh.
And like FEMA or somebody like issued to the residents of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, to have 2 weeks of food and water on hand leading up to April 8th. Like, I don't know what they think's going to happen, but that's their like general recommendation to the whole. That's a huge city.
Yeah. Wow. Speaking of water, and then I'm going to get into this, what I was going to say, but they suggest 1 gallon per person per day.
If you're a family of 8, that's a lot of water.
That's a lot of water. And so that's when we talked about water earlier. We're like, oh, does your neighbor have a hand pump? Because we're going to need that. But I was reading and it said, like, if there was a nuclear thing, you would need bottled water or some way to sanitize it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, let me tell you though. So they said in your kit, and I think this is funny, but okay, you guys will have to laugh if you think this is funny by yourself. Do an LOL. They said one of your emergency preparedness kit, you need to have a can opener. Do they think that? It's funny. I think it's so funny. Like, do people just have electric can openers? Or, I mean, if I was desperate, there'd be a knife going through that can. I mean,
you probably got people that don't know how to open a can without their like, electric can opener.
But have a can opener. That's what they recommend. Maybe it has more. Maybe it's like duct tape, and it has
more than one purpose
that I just don't know about yet. Another thing they said, which was interesting, was local maps. We've become so dependent on MapQuest to find where to go, but to have local maps.
Just Google that. Where is it at?
Yeah. How do I get to that place again? How do I get to this? Well, you got to have your map. And then battery powered or hand cranked radios.
Yeah, that's something that is really interesting because we think so much about the TV and, oh, if I want to know what's going on, I'm just going to get on X and I'm going to, see what the latest tweet is or what's happening on Reddit or, whatever your source for what's happening is. And that's great until it all goes down and there's like the FEMA emergency broadcast telling you what's happening over the radio. And how many people have one of those?
We don't. It's on our list.
Yeah.
We got to get one. Sometimes it's good to know and sometimes you don't want to know.
Right. But I think here's the thing, and you touched on this earlier, is it could be easy to isolate yourself kind of in a situation like that. And really, I think in wisdom, in prudence, I think it's reasonable to, like you said, check on your neighbors. Check on the people that are part of your biblical community that live within walking or biking distance of your house. Like, in caution, be prepared. And what a welcome sight it would be if one of your community members or one of the people in your church checked on you in the midst of things not going well.
Yeah.
Like, what a way to show the love of Christ, not just to be holed up in your bunker, but to be checking on other people.
Yes. Well, we've definitely covered our conviction, the character qualities are developed, and the challenges that arise when there are emergencies.
Yeah.
And we've probably gone over time as we've been doing recently.
For sure.
But you know what?
We hope you don't mind.
Yeah, we hope that you're encouraged by this. This is raising households that serve the Lord. That is the theme of our podcast. We're trying to be so faithful to that in our own lives and encouraging you in your life. And things that are important about like potential emergencies and things like that are so, so, so important to include your children in. Whether that is simply teaching them these lifestyle things, talking to them about the evils and the sadness of the world, like we talked about the fire in the house, just gently preparing them for their safety. If you have older kids, what do you need to do if something happens and you're not home? You either get home as soon as possible or you get to a biblical community member's house. So someone might show up at your door, right?
Right.
And so being ready, teaching, being faithful to the conviction of caring for others, and most importantly, being fearful of only the Lord.
Yeah, and ready to share the hope that you have.
Yes.
Yeah. Such a great thing. We hope, as always, that this conversation has been encouraging to you. I know it is just kind of crazy sometimes, but it's just an outpouring of what we're talking about in our lives, in our family. So we pray that you all have a blessed week.
All right, see you next week.